Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So, this is my first ever viewing of this movie. I kind of went in here just kind of blind, just kind of like not really trying to think of what is to have happened or what is to have been done during this film. I didn't go through any spoilers or whatever. I just went in here blind to just kind of see what this movie exactly was going to be about at some point, and I found myself just really enjoying the film. I found myself just kind of getting like very interested in this movie the more it is to play out. Plus, also, there is just a ton, and I mean a ton, of like from up to down, just kind of like these big named actors, or just like there's just some big kind of personas in this movie that I thoroughly started to really enjoy as the movie was to go along. There are points in time in this movie where they are to try to like reuse certain kind of footage with different faces on it, if you know what I mean. Kind of like CGIing in like someone to like redo an entire role as a different person. That tends to happen in this movie because really there is to be a spot where they're trying to recreate old Hollywood. And I thoroughly enjoyed this movie for trying that, for attempting that, but also giving us other scenes that are trying to just recreate stuff, which I thoroughly did enjoy. I liked the fact that we had a story mainly focusing on both Leonardo DiCaprio's character and Brad Pitt's character, who is to be Cliff or Rick Dalton and Cliff. I never quite caught the last name. Oh, Cliff Booth. There we go. And we also have uh, Maggie here, who is to also play Sharon Tate. So I guess probably all like more than likely some of this might actually be like some kind of true story or something like that. But I didn't like go into further about like information of all of this stuff and whatever, which I'm sure a lot of it is probably all true. I just didn't thoroughly dip myself into like the behind the scenes or like the real true stuff of it all. I just went in here and to just enjoy this movie for what it was, because I thoroughly enjoyed it. Maybe afterwards, maybe I'll find out more little tidbits about this movie because I thoroughly enjoyed it that much. But yeah, so really, I would say that this is probably a film that I would say like really like appeals to me personally. So I'm like severely won over by it. Like I would say that it's probably a solid, great film. Even though a lot of people might find it to be slow, or some people might find parts in this movie to just kind of like why did they go so far into like this part, this piece, these people, so on and so forth. But it's to eventually tell a story and to eventually help us understand where this story is to head. um, it didn't really bother me that this movie was the length that it was, but eventually once we get into like the later parts of the film, I just started to just kind of lose interest because there was a lot of just like slow down parts, like, and I'm like, man, like we're getting towards the end and it's getting slow, really slow. But then eventually it picks back up again, and then you're like, whoa. Like if anybody is to complain how slow this movie is throughout, go ahead and check out the freaking end of this film, where, oh my god, like it just really just like goes all over it. I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. This is freaking awesome. Like there is a big payout at the end of this movie, and I was just like, say what now? When we got towards the end there, just because I got just so like something very unique and one of a kind delivered to us in a film. Plus, like we got like a thorough explanation of Rick Dalton's career, and I thought that that was kind of fascinating too. We kind of have movies that are kind of delivered to us that kind of feel like Valkyrie, or like have these feelings of other things. and like are probably having different kind of names and different kind of whatevers. It seems that Rick Dalton's career has mostly been tied to westerns, to the point of him getting a lead spot in a movie called Bounty Law. But anyways, so this is to like focus on Rick Dalton's career and how he's a very much like struggling actor, where Cliff's character is actually his stunt double, and like kind of teeing it up for some people that have probably or just kind of like, yeah, I don't remember this film, or I don't quite like whatever about this film. And then also, it seems that Sharon Tate just so happens to be a neighbor of Cliff Dalton's like neighborhood. And also, we have plenty of times where kind of Cliff is doing things to help Rick, and so we're gonna consistently see Cliff like in the neighborhood as well. Uh, Cliff is to eventually like continue to spot this like hippie girl, and there's eventually going to be a story coming out of that. So with that said, like I know there's probably a ton of people that have a lot of just like know the history of this movie and know everything about it, the ins and outs and whatever. So if I'm not heavily specific about something, or if there isn't an immense insight that I have about any number of this situation, I came in here completely blind, and in time, I hope that you guys enjoyed it. So like I would probably say that this is probably a solid, great movie, and I don't think that you can probably get any higher than that. Like, you could probably go with epic, but like, and I would have to say it like that, epic. But like, really, also people could have some complaints about this movie, and I can understand that too. Like, I just feel that it's a solid, great movie, and like, I just enjoy the way that this story is to trickle out. If anything, like I didn't overall understand why we had to get to the Sharon Tate stuff. Like it just didn't feel. It just feels like they wanted to have a character like somehow like involved in the Rick Cliff thing, but I didn't quite understand exactly how. It felt like they had to like incorporate Sharon Tate to have like a female character in here. But like I don't feel like the stories became completely entwined, but still um, like that's not a bad thing to have Sharon Tate in this movie as as Robbie. So with that said, I am gonna go out of my way to go into spoilers about this movie. Yeah, so a solid, great movie. And like I would not normally give that out. Like I think I say solid, great, just because this movie like appeals to me, and like plus also like even like people were saying it's like man like even like Avengers movies don't get that high of a grading for you or whatever. Like I would just say that this movie is like an interesting look back at things, and I guess I can enjoy it via that. It's an interesting, just kind of uh, like movie, which like that can heavily interest me. And like I don't know, like I wouldn't say that this is like the best film that I've ever seen in my life, but I think it would pretty be pretty high up there. So go ahead and check this out if you've never seen this. I get that it's a long film and some people might not find it worth their time or whatever, but I enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. So let's go out of our way to say that, so this is a solid, great movie, probably besides superhero films, because like superhero films, you can't help but not say that like an Endgame or whatever is just like you're caught up in that and whatever. So like but this is pretty good. This is a pretty good movie. So let's go out of our way to say that we've seen this movie now, and let's go into spoilers about it because I've already talked about it. Because if you haven't seen this movie, go out of your way. Go out of your way and watch this film. Some like it kind of feels like a good, like a feel good to me kind of film, especially once we get to a certain part, which I hope to break down eventually into spoilers So let's get into that now. Let's go out of our way to say it is spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about that time to spoil this movie. It's worth a watch. Go out of your way, you say you've seen it. I think this probably has to be forcibly be seen on uh, Stars, but by and large, go ahead and go not into Stars and watch it via the two apps that I've mentioned. You can watch things for free. So go ahead into an app called Letter C Movies. You can probably easily see this there, or you can go into an app called Fox HD Movies and probably see any number of things plus this movie for absolutely free. And so let's get into spoilers. So the very beginning of this is like this whole entire movie is to consistently have like the who's who of like actors every single time like we go through any little part of this movie. I'm like, oh my god, this star is in this movie. Like the guy from like Cobra Kai, who's uh like the guy from like Rambo and Cobra Kai, like he's in this movie. We have the guy who like is in the movie like Warriors and Dexter. He's in here. Like I'm not gonna know every single name of every single person because that's just not gonna happen because there's too many stars here. So, uh, but this is to showcase a guy named uh, Jake Cahill who is to be this bounty hunter and to just do this kind of like promotional spot, like showcasing, uh, like Jake, like talking to the sheriff or talking to this old guy, whatever. Like I don't know exactly, I don't remember what their names were, but so this is like a promotional spot for you to help understand Jake Cahill, but and so like this western spot is to showcase and be like shown first. But this transitions us to have this interview being done by Alan Kincaid. And so Jake Cahill is actually Rick Dalton, and next to Rick Dalton is a guy named Cliff Booth. And so Alan is doing this interview, like talking about what exactly does a stuntman do, because some people may not know what an actual stuntman does. And so Rick is to mention that it's like, well, yeah, like uh, if there's some kind of thing that is to quite possibly get me injured and will hold the studio up for X amount of days, that's when they bring in Cliff to go and do all of Rick's stunts. And so they kind of just easily explain what a stuntman is. And so basically that's a bulk of the questions that kind of get here, I guess, to actually just understand what a stuntman is. Because some people don't know. So, uh, so transition us to have Sharon Tate coming off this airport, getting her luggage, and going with a man called Roman Polanski. Uh, but like the thing that I don't quite understand with like Sharon Tate is like in the early part of this movie, she's with Roman Polanski, but then all of a sudden she's to end up with some J character later on in the movie, and then it's just like she's with him the rest of the film, and I didn't quite understand that. I was a little confused. Like maybe that whole relationship with her and Roman Polanski just fizzled out. The guy who evidently like directed Rosemary's Baby. But anyways, so uh, we have Cliff, who is to drive Rick everywhere he goes, because we find out that Rick Dalton had lost his license because of some accident that he was in. So uh, that transitions us to have Cliff and Rick go to a guy named Marvin, who is to basically be Al Pacino's character in this film. And so Rick is to talk with Marvin basically about uh Rick's whole entire career. Like basically going through and mentioning that he had done a western called Tanner. He had done also uh, a German Nazi movie where he was to go and flamethrower a bunch of Nazis and kill them off. Rick was to mention how thoroughly he had to go and learn how to be able to practice his flamethrower, and they actually show him do that. And Rick is to complain how hot it is, and so the guy who's like the flamethrower expert is like, "It's a flamethrower. It's supposed to be hot." So, uh, Marvin is to continue talking to uh, Rick about his work and mentioning that Rick has kind of like run the gambit of being involved in a number of TV shows that are on his network, that eventually he is going to have to go and become a villain for some other show. Maybe like he had become a villain in Green Hornet, maybe he'll become eventually a villain in Batman and Robin, and like any number of other things that are going to be involved in that network. He's going to like continue to go through this rotation and just eventually play this guy that's going to get the boots by someone. And like Marvin is really talking to Rick as if like, dude, like your days as being an actor is just over. Like you're like really just like spinning your wheels, and if anything, like Marvin really wants to offer Rick a like an Italian movie kind of job, so maybe he can kind of like get him away from like what he's doing. So, uh, so that transitions us to have all of a sudden like Rick is getting out of this meeting with Marvin and talking to Cliff, and like Rick just wants to bust out crying, and Cliff is telling Rick, it's like, hey, don't start crying. If anything, like you're crying in front of the Mexicans, don't do that. And so, because Rick is just like, God, my career is over. Like I'm done for. I'm gonna have to go to like movies in other countries to just like try and keep my career like to make money somewhere. And Cliff is just like, well, maybe like, you know what, I haven't had a career as like good as you have, but like, you know what, maybe Italian movies aren't that bad. Like maybe we'll just continue us working. And like Rick is just at this emotional state where he's just thinking like my career is just in the dumpster, and that eventually it's going to get to the point where Rick is going to get stopped getting called for things. So, uh, and like Rick is saying that he's a has been, and so on and so forth. So while both Rick and Cliff are just kind of driving around, they are to eventually see these hippie girls that are to just sing this bizarre song and kind of like dumpster dive and all kinds of things. So like they're talking like, but Cliff and Rick are still talking about like Rome movies or Italian movies, and like Rick is just having a very tough time getting his finger around it. So uh and also Rick is just like, well, like maybe something will like happen for me, because uh Rick and Cliff are all of a sudden making it back to Rick's home, and all of a sudden they turn off to the side and they see Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate together, and Rick is just like, well, I've never seen them like out of the house before, and maybe this is just a sign that maybe I will just be backing out of my driveway one day, and like the guy who directed Rosemary's Baby or whatever is going to be interested in like giving me a shot or whatever. So that transitions Cliff to go to his place. Like we have kind of like a very like I think Cliff lives on like a trailer park like next to like a drive-in, and so Cliff is to go and give food to his dog. Funny enough, how like Cliff will like be like really just talking it out with his dog consistently, like having a real relationship there, and Cliff is like giving his dog like these like wolf looking like cans of food, and so I think the dog yelped at one point, and Cliff is just like, if you yelp, you aren't getting anything. And so the dog's like, okay, okay. So we transition to have Rick doing lines where like he is like thoroughly like trying to memorize his lines by like bouncing it off some tape recorder where Rick had tape recorded the other conversation, and so Rick is now like trying to say the opposite line. And so Rick is like consistently doing that to help him memorize lines, and so uh, both Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski are heading to the Playboy Mansion for us to eventually see Michelle Phillips, Steve McQueen, and Jay Sebring, which will see them. We'll see Jay consistently through this film. We won't see much of Michelle Phillips, and Steve McQueen is just to set up that both Sharon Tate and Jay seem to have a relationship with one another, and I guess that relationship will eventually come back around, and then they'll end up together, I guess, shortly thereafter this party. And Steve McQueen is like setting that up to let us know that that these people had a relationship, and it seems like they'll get back into that relationship. Because like I got confused when Cliff was on the rooftop. Like I was like, wait a minute, so is this like a flashback or is this like current time happening? I got a little confused. So uh anyways, so Cliff is to drop off Rick at his movie set, and so Rick is now like telling Cliff about his TV antenna that I guess is like a little wonky, and so Rick is asking Cliff is if he can fix the TV antenna, and so Cliff is just like, well, yeah, like if I'll do that, like you go ahead and ask the guys if I'm going to be working anytime soon, and so Rick is just like, well, okay, I'll do that, but fix my TV antenna. So Rick goes on to hair and makeup to talk to a guy named San Wanamaker, who is to kind of talk to him about like how like this guy Caleb Madrid, who or no wait, Caleb like Madrid is Timothy Elephant. Caleb is to be Rick's character. So Sam is mentioning that he wants like a big mustache on him, and he wants like this long hair, and so Caleb is just or Rick, who is now Caleb, is like, well, like, how is anybody gonna see that this is like me through all of this like mustache and long hair? And so Sam is just like you're just gonna act right through it. Like everyone's gonna know it's you because you're gonna be acting so well compared to everyone else. So transition us to have Cliff go out and drive on home to Rick's place to fix his TV antenna, to have Cliff seeing this hippie girl yet again, and I believe they end up calling this girl like Pussycat, uh, this hippie girl, but you're gonna find out eventually. I'm gonna start losing track of who all the names of everyone is eventually once we get to these hippie people, let's just say. So, more than likely, I might get to a point where I say hippie girl or hippie guy just because eventually and I think that'll happen way later. But, anyways, pushing on. So, Cliff is to kind of see this girl, but he doesn't pick her up yet. So Cliff is to make it onto the rooftop, and so while Cliff is to be on this rooftop, I want to say a good portion of this is stuff that is actually going on, but I also think that some of this is also like a flashback memory of Cliff's. Uh, so it's kind of confusing because when Cliff is on the rooftop, Sharon Tate is like turning her radio on, and so Cliff is to, I guess, have a flashback about him working with this guy named Randy, who is Kurt Russell's character. So, uh, like Cliff is just saying hi to Randy, and Randy is going into Rick's trailer to uh, to talk to him about the movie that he's going to do. And so Randy doesn't want Cliff to work in this film. And Rick is like, well, if I don't work, he doesn't work. Like, so, like, if you have a spot for him to do, like, have him do it. And Randy is to mention that supposedly Cliff had allegedly murdered his own wife. We have a scene where Cliff is on this boat with his scuba gear. All of a sudden, like his wife is to come into fray, and she is just like, nah, 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 nah. And Rick is just like on the boat, just going like, huh? And like, we don't actually show him like kill anybody or whatever, but like, there's an allegation that supposedly Cliff had killed his wife, and but there was never a real true, like, that never comes out in this movie where whether he did or did not. So Rick is to try to come up with any reason for Randy to keep having Cliff on, and so Rick mentions that Cliff was a war hero, and so Randy is like, fine, like, we'll work with him. So that transitions us to Randy grabbing Cliff and saying, like, okay, you got to be sent to wardrobe. So all of a sudden, we are to see Bruce Lee, which this has got to be the greatest spot in this movie. And I kind of have heard there's some problems with people in the scene, but like I didn't go out of my way to see what this was like, but I heard there's some kind of like thing about it where people are kind of upset about it, but I don't know why. Because I didn't go further on into it because I didn't understand what all of that was until now. Once seeing this movie, I'm like, oh, I guess there was some controversy about this, but I didn't know that this was all like this thing. I just like I didn't have any bother about it. So Bruce Lee is going on and talking about uh like him fighting a guy named Cassius Clay, and he talks about combat, and he's talking about that I kill people. And so like Bruce Lee also talks that he has lethal weapons, and if he was to use it on anyone, he would probably go away forever, because his legs and his hands are registered as lethal weapons. So Cliff is to eventually hear all this, and he's just like, you know what, like, how about we just go a few rounds? Like, how about we just, like, how about we just go a few rounds? Like, how about we just, like, how about we just, like, how about we just go a few rounds? Like, how about we just, 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 like, how about we Like, how about I just see what you have in your arsenal? And so Bruce Lee, like, there's no kicking in, like, there's no kicking or there's no punching in the heads. Everything is like neck down. So if they were to go on camera, they'll be fine. There's no bruises. But so what ends up happening, which I was like really impressed by, is all of a sudden Cliff goes to fight Bruce Lee. And so Bruce Lee ends up kicking Cliff in the chest, knocking him down. Cliff gets back up and he's like, okay, try to do that again. And so all of a sudden, we have Cliff who grabs Bruce Lee and chucks him up against this car, which coincidentally is Randy's wife's car. And but then so like Cliff and Bruce Lee are fighting, and I'm like, oh my god, Brad Pitt is basically fighting Bruce Lee. Like, this is awesome. Like, yeah, like the actor who played Bruce Lee has the name too, but I'm like, this is Brad Pitt versus Bruce Lee. Like, this is awesome. So, uh, so I just thought that that was a really cool moment. But then again, we have Randy's wife who is like, hey, what the heck are you guys doing? And so, like, she ends up stopping this fight because both of these guys need to eventually work. And so Randy comes into the fray and he's like, God, like, I knew this was going to happen. And so, like, Randy's wife doesn't want Cliff to work, and like also because like these guys are like stars or whatever. Like Bruce Lee is star of Green Hornet and whatever, and so they're just trying to do a lot of just like mending fences and whatever, and trying to like so pushing on. So I guess that was a flashback, of course. I guess I would naturally assume to just kind of remember about old times. So, because Cliff is back onto this rooftop, and for most of the point, he's shirtless, of course, because why wouldn't he be? He's freaking Brad Pitt. So, uh, so Sharon, Tate, and Jay are at their home. And so I think Jay is talking about some book that he had read, and all of a sudden there comes, I believe, Roman Polanski, who ends up going and knocking on their door asking for someone who lived nearby. And so I was like, is this a flashback or is this current time, or like I was just a little confused about this moment, and plus also I was just kind of curious if this is like Roman Polanski, but because I don't know. So, but pushing on. So, uh, Rick is now in his kind of place to do his Western film, and Rick is to eventually sit next to a girl that is to supposedly have the name of Mary Bell because she won't give out her real name because she's a very method actor. She's also just extremely freaking smart, this little girl, to the point of her just kind of like mentioning about like actor and actress etiquette and like, and just kind of like really easily just like breaking down all of this stuff. And so, like, we have Rick who is like, who are you, girl? Like, who are you? Like, we have this girl who's like reading like the history of Walt Disney like from her book because she's like, man, like this is like a one of a kind guy that you're never gonna see again, and like I want to know everything about him. And like we just have Rick who's just like, good God, this girl is smarter than I am. So all of a sudden, like Rick is also reading a book before he's to like go and do his thing, and so Mary Bell is asking Rick what he's reading, and so it's a guy who ends up getting the name of Easy Breezy, and so like it's kind of a Western book, and it's about a guy who is kind of at the tail end of his like life. He's becoming kind of a useless character, and so uh, and so all of a sudden we have like Rick, who's just like breaking down and crying because Rick realizes now that Easy Breezy is just like him. And so Mary Bell is coming over to comfort him. And so Rick is to say, it's like, well, yeah, in another like 20 to 30 years, you're going to be living in the same boat that I am. And so Mary Bella is just like, well, like, because and plus also Rick calls her like a pumpkin puss or something. So like Maribella's like, you know what, like nickname aside, like if anything, like I'm just gonna be nice to you because like you're having a tough time, and so Maribel goes to like walk off. So we transition to Sharon Tate eventually picking up some hitchhiker. I guess it's another hippie girl to go back to some spot. And so uh, Sharon Tate is to see this movie theater that is showing The Wrecking Crew, a movie that I guess she had done herself. And so she tries to eventually sneak into this movie to watch it for free because she technically is a star of this film. She's in the film. So but also she went to a bookstore to buy a book for her husband. So, uh, so Rick is to all of a sudden meet Timothy Olyphant's character, who is Jim Stacy, who eventually plays a guy named Mandrid or Johnny Mandrid. And so, like, they're like catching up with one another, like they're talking about like movies that Rick had been in, and Bounty Law, and all kinds of things. And so Jim is to ask Rick, like, didn't you at one point almost get the Steve McQueen film The Great Escape? And then all of a sudden we have an entire like scene from The Great Escape with Leonardo DiCaprio in it, and he like had done this scene, and like supposedly like Steve McQueen had like I guess like almost gotten hurt on that movie or something like that, and so like Rick was almost to be a part of this film, but then eventually just at the last minute, just like Steve McQueen just decided to do the movie regardless. So uh so we transition back to Sharon Tate, who is going back to see her own movie called The Wrecking Crew. Or it's The Wrecking Crew or The Wrecking Ball. I think it's The Wrecking Crew. So Sharon Tate is to go and ask for a ticket, and it's 75 cents. And Sharon Tate is like, well, like I'm in this movie, like could I get in for free considering I'm in this movie? And so all of a sudden we have like a manager coming in, and like Sharon Tate is taking a picture by the poster, like, well, I guess yeah, she is in here. Plus I guess she was also in Valley of the Dolls, I guess. So good for her. So yeah, I guess it was Wrecking Ball. I might have said Wrecking Crew. I apologize. Anyways, so uh transition us back to have us do this whole Western scene with Johnny Mandrid and Caleb and some businessman called Gilbert. So Johnny Mandrid is coming into town, I guess, as this as this good guy, and so like Johnny is talking to Gilbert, this businessman, and so Caleb comes in and is to be the guy who is to trying to help us understand who Johnny Mandrid is, and so on and so forth. And so eventually that leads Johnny to go back or to go into the saloon and like going and doing these lines with Caleb, where Caleb is going down the stairs of this bar and or this saloon, not bar, because it's Western style. So both Johnny and Caleb are having these long stretches of lines being put together between one another. And so eventually, once we get to this table where they are to like continue on with this line of dialogue, eventually we have Rick who is to ask for his lines because he's like, line. Like, so, like, and this is the part that we saw earlier where Rick had memorized all this stuff and he, like, knew every bit of it. But when we finally have him sit down against this man, he starts slipping. So all of a sudden, like after this whole thing is to be done and over with, all of a sudden we just start seeing like Rick making back to his trailer and he's just destroying his trailer, talking about how he had 8 whiskey sours that night and he shouldn't have drank so much because that made him forget some of his lines. And so now Rick is like mentioning that he should have practiced his lines, and he's even threatening himself. He's threatening himself to say that he's going to put a bullet into his own head, like because like that's how crazy that that's how ticked off he is about like him looking bad in front of people, that he didn't have all of his lines memorized, and like he's threatening to blow his own brains out, and that's like whoa. Like, but like that whole scene was just so like wow. But like stuff like that probably happens all the time where like people are so upset and angry because they fudged a line. Like I'm sure a lot of people get the problem a lot. Like going into like any acting like classes or whatever like that I barely did. Like every once in a while, like people are just so upset that like the one time that they're supposed to put something together, they're just like, "Arr!" And so it happens to everyone. So, and I just not to boast, whatever. I did a thing once, whatever. So, like that doesn't make me an expertise in the acting realm of things, but whatever. So, uh, Cliff is to finally pick up this hippie girl and take her to a place called Spawn Movie Ranch. And so, like, this girl and Cliff are having this, like, whole conversation where, like this girl and Cliff are, like, talking about how, like, old Cliff is or whatever. And so, but eventually, Cliff is to be very familiar with Spawn's Movie Ranch because he knew a guy named George that lived there, and like they used to do like bounty law there, so he knows exactly where the spot is. So uh so now we go uh to now Caleb is doing a scene with Luke Perry. I'm like, Luke Perry is in this film? Good God, they got everybody in this movie. So, like, Luke Perry is in this film as uh, as some kind of, like, bingo lancer guy, or Bengal lancer guy. Like, he has this weird, bizarrish, like, company that he's with, and they have to, like, make fun of it. So, Caleb is holding Mary Bell in his in his lap, and so now like Caleb is threatening this guy with shooting Mary Bell, and so like Caleb goes into this whole scene and kind of makes fun of this guy. He goes into like tossing this girl down on the ground, just saying how like he can just chuck this girl to the ground and so on and so forth. Like I'm paraphrasing and whatever. And so all of a sudden, Luke is to eventually make his way back out of this spot. And so they yell cut, and all of a sudden, like we have like Sam who's like uh going to Rick and is like, oh my god, that was amazing. Like I've never seen something like that. And also we had like Rick who's just started off the top of his head just start to like improvise lines like Bango Buster something or whether. It's like, and so like Sam was just like, oh my god, this was the most like one of a kind like performance. And Murray Bell was telling Rick, it's like, oh my God, like that's the best acting that I've ever seen. And so all of a sudden, like Rick is almost breaking down yet again, just like, yeah, like I did do this right. Like I am good at this still. And like that is the nice moment for Rick to just have. So so pushing on. So Cliff is to make it to Spawn's movie ranch with this girl who I guess has the name Pussycat. I don't know why. So uh, all of a sudden we are to see at this movie ranch. We are to see like a guy named Tex doing these like horse rides for people, and so all of a sudden Cliff is like, you know what, I want to see George. Like I want to just kind of reminisce. Like I want to see if he's up. Like I want to see him because like Cliff is seeing way too many hippie people, and he's just like, so is George allowing this, or is George dead? And now I'm gonna find his body somewhere, and like so, like I want to go and find George and at least speak to him. So, because like Cliff can't believe that all these people that are here and that they're all like with George is okay being here. So Cliff is to go into George's home to be stopped by this girl named Squeaky. Squeaky, I believe, is actually Dakota Fanning, and I'm like, wow, I haven't seen her in so long. I'm like, man, it's so nice to see Dakota Fanning. I haven't seen her in so long. Oh, great. So Dakota Fanning has this like red hair, but it's like pinkish red, and so like we have like Squeaky, who is Dakota Fanning. Squeaky is to like tell us like everything about George and how like he's become blind, and how like Cliff is just telling her, it's like, well, hey, like this screen door isn't gonna like prevent me from coming into this house. Like I want to go and actually see George. And so George goes into the home, and Squeaky mentions, it's like, well, hey, like you might have to like shake him up a little bit to wake him up, because I effed him like a little bit ago, and like I effed his brains out, so like he might need a little shaken up to get awake. So George goes back in the room to eventually go and shake the guy who is to be George. I'm like, oh my God, like George, like I recently saw the guy who plays George. I saw him in the movie The Burbs recently. I was like, man, like this is just like a star-studded event, this movie. But I was like, every little like actor in here, like I was like, yeah, this is freaking awesome. So, uh, so George is talking about like George keeps asking Cliff like who the heck is he, and like Cliff has to keep like reintroducing himself, and George is just like, well, yeah, like I let all these people live here. I let live Squeaky here. Like it's fine, whatever. Like, cause and George is just like, let me sleep because I want to go and wake up by the time that FBI is on, because I want to watch that with Squeaky, because I don't want to fall asleep because Squeaky will give me crap for it. So so that just leaves like Cliff to just be like, okay, I guess that's fine. So Cliff goes like out of the place, and all of a sudden he notices that uh, there is a knife put into his tire. And oh, we also see Harley Quinn Smith, Kevin Smith's daughter, in this movie. She doesn't have a line, but she's kind of like the background character for a lot of these hippie girl like moments, and she has like black hair. I've mostly seen her as blonde hair, so it's cool to see her in this movie also. So, uh, so Cliff is going and seeing one guy there. And so Cliff is like looking at this guy, is like, did you put this knife in my tire? and this guy doesn't say anything. So Cliff just goes, like, he grabs his tire and he grabs the jack and says, like, you know what, this isn't even my car, and now you're going to fix it. And so this guy's like, no, I'm not. And so, like, Cliff just starts beating the crap out of him, like, punching him repetitiously. All of a sudden, like, the hippie girls start making their way over, and Cliff is like, you do not take one more step, or I'm going to punch out this guy's teeth. So, like, he's going to fix it. I'm going to leave. And so, because once Cliff starts making it out of the George's home, all of a sudden all these hippie girls are like accusing him of something or whatever, and like calling him all kinds of stuff. So Cliff just makes his way to forcing this guy to put a tire on his car, and like the guy wanted to wipe his mouth, and Cliff is like, tire first. So all of a sudden, one of the hippie girls are to ride off to try to get a guy named Tex to come back. And by the time that Tex comes back, Cliff is already riding off to the sunset. So that transitions us to have Rick and Cliff going and watching the show FBI together. So that leads like Rick mentioning that, like, oh yeah, I'm in this episode tonight, like, look at me. And so you have Rick kind of being infused in these scenes and how there's some pretty decent shots here. So that leads us all of a sudden, like, Marvin, who is Al Pacino's character, also seeing the show, and he really liked Marvin, or Marvin really liked Rick, and so Marvin is now calling anybody in the brother. And so that leads us to a thing of 6 months later. So Rick is doing a bunch of Italian movies. He used to do a lot of westerns. I guess one was called like Nebraska something, or Nebraska Man, or something like that. Where I guess he did eventually find a love of his life during that film. But he kind of did a bunch of other kind of westerns that have long stretches of names. Rick also did some knockoff James Bond film, which I'm not going to say what the actual titles of any of these movies are, because they're probably hard to pronounce, or they're far too long to. So, but eventually Rick and his wife are to make their way to come back to, I guess, America through an airport, of course, because where else would you come from? So, and also it seems that Rick is kind of telling Cliff that maybe their careers are over soon, that maybe Rick is not going to be able to like snag any kind of like pilot deals or anything like that for any shows anytime soon. So maybe both Rick and Cliff are like, see, like, this is like the best that they can do. So all of a sudden we are to see Sharon Tate now pregnant, I guess, with Jay's husband, or Jay's baby. So Sharon Tate is to go with Sharon Tate is to like go with some other woman who is to obviously be Rumor Willis, but I don't know, like, I think her name is like Joanna, and like they're to talk about the babies and stuff like that, and whichever, pushing on. So Rick and Cliff are to have this this spot where they're going to this restaurant and getting as hammered as they can possibly get, and Sharon and Jay are going to some restaurant to have everyone else but Sharon get drunk. So Sharon is kind of feeling like of course, her pregnancy more so than ever. So all of a sudden, we transition to have all these people eventually go home after this whole restaurant. It seems that both Rick and Cliff had gotten so drunk that they had taken a cab home. So all of a sudden, we transition to all these people going home, and so we have these group of hippies that are in this car, and so here's where it gets pretty good. So evidently, Tex, who is one of these hippies that is in this car, had mentioned that supposedly Charlie had told them to kill. And so all of a sudden, this girl named Sadie had this plan because um, while this car was to be left running, all of a sudden we have Rick who gets out of his home and he's like, freaking get to moving your car. Like, move your car. Like, your car sounds like garbage. Get the heck out of here. And so Tex is like saying like, well, like I'm gonna try to back out, and he's like, go ahead, like go, like get out of here. So all of a sudden, like everybody is like, oh my god, that was Jake. That was Jake from Bounty Law. Oh my god, from the 50s and the Western and whatever. So uh and so Sadie is like, wait a minute, like all these people are in like Beverly Hills, right? Like Hollywood, right? Like, how about we have this plan where we kill the ones who taught us to kill? Like, because Jake was in this like bounty law thing, and that means he killed wanted men. And like, yeah, like, so we should go after people who taught us to kill as children or as whatever. So that leads us to have uh have Tex, Sadie, and some other hippie girl. I don't know the name. Because one girl had decided to just drive off with the car, and so these three people decided like, well, we're gonna still do what we're gonna do, and then just like we're gonna try to figure out how to get the heck out of here. So Tex, Sadie, and Hippie Girl eventually make their way into Rick's home that has kind of Cliff, who's just kind of like he's trying to feed his dog, but like the dog food is just being like slid out of this can um to make it into this bowl. So Cliff is just like, ugh. Like I think he ended up taking this 150 cent uh, like weed thing that was kind of making him trip on acid, but I don't exactly know. So all of a sudden, like we have Tex and the hippie girls breaking into see Cliff because Rick is actually in his pool, just kind of like listening to music, and so and also Cliff's wife is like sleeping, and so Tex is to break into this home and grab Rick's wife, and so Cliff is like, "Oh, who are you?" But he's like, "Wait, I know you. Like, you're like Rex or Tex or something. You have some stupid name, and I don't know you. I don't know you." So Tex is mentioning that he's the devil, and I'm like, "Okay, all right. Like, this is getting interesting. Like, Tex has a gun, and so all of a sudden." We have Brad Pitt, who's all of a sudden just like whistling "Sweet Dixie" to his dog. All of a sudden, like his dog just goes leaping at Tex, ripping his arm off, and just chewing the crap out of Tex, like going after his junk, going after his arm, going after any number of things, like brutally taking this guy down. And then after that, Cliff transitions the dog to go after Sadie that's behind him. And so like Sadie just gets torn apart. And so but eventually Cliff does have to go and try to go after these people and like to just like really just defend himself. And so uh like Cliff goes after the one girl who's like the redhead of this group, and so to kind of just free like Cliff or Rick's wife from being killed. So Rick is taking down Tex. He's taking down like all the people with the exclusion of Sadie, because Sadie like goes and breaks through this window to or breaks through this door to eventually go out to fall into this pool, and Rick is like, "What the heck?" So Rick scrambles out of his pool and goes and grabs this flamethrower that he had from his film, that he kept from like his Nazi film, and all of a sudden, like Rick just starts spraying this girl down with this flamethrower, and she's still in this pool, so it doesn't quite make sense. But this girl just like, I guess, with all this like severe burns, just dies and keels over. So this is like freaking the craziest part of this entire movie. Like, forget the whole Bruce Lee thing and how great that was. Like, just the dog attack, and all of a sudden this flamethrower filled my mind, and I was like, man, this is amazing. So, but eventually Cliff is to get stabbed into the leg. Both Cliff's dog and Rick's wife are to go ahead and just sleep together, and like Rick's wife took like a number of sleeping pills, and like she's out like a log. So so Rick is to go back into the home and just kind of check on things, and so he ends up calling the police, and so Rick is being like hauled away via the ambulance, uh and so Rick has made his statement, Cliff had made his statement, and Rick's wife had made her statement, and then so uh, so Rick is like seeing Cliff being hauled away, and so Rick is to mention to Cliff, it's like, hey man, like I'm gonna go to like wherever you're going, like I'm gonna see you there, and Cliff is like, you know what, I'll be fine. If anything, I'll be hobbling for a while, but I think I'll be fine, because like Cliff is a durable guy, anyways. So, uh, like, uh, Rick is mentioning to Cliff that he's a good friend, and Cliff is just saying like goodbye to him, like that Rick should go and like sleep with that woman that he's with, and just because of like the night that they had. So all of a sudden we have Rick, who before he goes back into his home, all of a sudden is talking to Jay about what had all happened, and kind of like bringing up like every part of what had just happened, and Jay is like, say what? Like he's just like losing his mind and about this whole story. And so we also have Tate, who is also on this intercom talking to both Rick and Jay, like also. And so coincidentally, after this whole debacle, Rick is to get invited into Sharon Tate and Jay's home, and like that's the way that this movie just ends. So yeah, so with that said, like I probably covered like most of this movie, but there was little things that I slipped and slid and whatever, because I just didn't want to like take the whole like movie, because there's some like things where I kind of deemed to just be important, like especially once we get to the whole uh like the whole part like leading up to uh like Sharon Tate and like Rick and Cliff going to this like restaurant, whatever. I was kind of like, man, like once we get to like after like the 6 minute or 6 month later thing, I was kind of like, man, this movie's kind of slowing down a little bit. But um, but with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.